Yeah, it's an interesting time. I think it's an interesting time for all of you guys, interesting time for us, and trying to figure out where we go from here. Um, I think in our community and racing, clearly it's pretty quiet time. We are doing a lot of iRacing, which is an interesting thing, something I have not done before. But in essence, we can race against all the regular guys. Our cars have all of our regular sponsors on them. We are still doing a lot of our charity initiatives that we do with some of our partners through that, and laps completed. Heck, I mean, it's gotten so, I would say, important that NBC Sports is now showing it on TV every weekend, which is a little bit of a surprise for me. But I think people are dying for something to watch. Everybody wants content, and so that's kind of the position that we've been in. But aside from that, I mean, racing is such a unique world that we rely on sponsor dollars. I often give, and in fact, I can relate it directly to Ohio State, that if X, Y, or Z company doesn't sponsor Ohio State athletics that year, the football team is still going to go out and play. Whereas in our world, we don't. If we don't have the sponsors, we don't race. So it's kind of an interesting period of time in which we're balancing that, trying to keep them happy, trying to help them, drive business during this time, and then obviously get ready for whenever racing does kick off.
I also want to introduce you while we're on here to my very good friend Randy Ludlow from the Columbus Dispatch.
Yeah.
He and I usually meet virtually at the 500 every year, so I invited him to join us here. And Randy, Jeff, what were you thinking about today?
Well, by way of introduction, and not to date myself, I've been in journalism since 1972 when I was a copy boy at the Indianapolis News. I'm a native of Indy. I've missed 2 Indy 500s since 1970. I interviewed Graham's father, Bobby, in the pits in 1982 when he was a rookie in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Been to races all these years. Certainly enjoyed Graham's win at Mid-Ohio a few years ago. But Graham, you constantly deal with journalists, including my bud Tim May, formerly of the Dispatch. We'd often talk Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing. What do you look for in a reporter? How do they gain your trust? How do you deal with them, and how do you learn how to present yourself? You're certainly one of the most social media savvy drivers out there.
I try. I think, Randy, you know this, that the biggest thing in my world and your world is trust, right? I think for me, a guy like Tim May, why do I trust a guy like Tim May? Often I could say, hey, Tim, or Tim would say, hey, off the record, and ask me some question. And I can tell you every single time that we had that conversation, nothing was ever on the record. Nothing ever came up until it was approved to be released. One of the major issues that we have in today's world with social media, with the access through the internet that everybody gets, is that often when you say off the record or try to trust somebody, they've got a mic turned on in their pocket or a recorder turned on in their pocket, and the next thing you know, it's out there. And that's the biggest thing that we fear in our industry is I don't want to use the terminology clickbait, but basically, somebody who wants to have the first story. We get how valuable that is. And we get that certain drivers and certain teams get more clicks, and people want to read more and know more about the situation that they're in. But the biggest thing with trust for me is if I tell you, hey, Tim, we're going to announce this new sponsor. It's going to happen in 3 days. Please wait till 8 a.m. on this day to release it. And he does that time and time again, you're going to trust him. And Dad trusts him. I think over the years, Dad built that relationship with Tim. We've been able to build that relationship with Tim. And so it's always been really, really good.
Great. Thank you.
Colin, you had a question?
Yeah. Thanks for coming in, Graham. With all of this iRacing, I've seen some of the rigs that people have. How does it compare to the actual racing that you do? And do you think it hangs on after all of this is done?
Well, I have no doubt that it's going to hang on. This has been iRacing has been something that's been very popular for a long time now. A lot of the guys that are doing really well, like in the IndyCar Challenge that we have, are guys that have been doing this iRacing deal for 10, 12 years. In fact, everybody who's won so far, everybody that qualifies and runs up front, all of them are what I would consider gamers in the iRacing space. How is it alike? In many ways, actually, the tracks, to a T, the tracks are very similar to the real thing. You know, they laser scan, they 3D scan every track that we go to. So when we run them on the simulator, if there was a bump at Mid-Ohio, for instance, and there's a bump in turn 100 feet into the corner, it's going to be there on this simulator. It is real in that sense. Where does it lack is two things. First off, guys don't care if they hit each other. There's no, you know, with the reset buttons, and frankly, it doesn't mean that much to a lot of guys, so they don't really care. So that's one. Two is to understand how to get the speed out of the car. The way that you go fast in iRacing is very different than the way you go fast in real life. When we drive an IndyCar, most of our sensation is through our hands, but also, frankly, through your butt. You feel a lot of the movements of the race car, you know, through your back and your lower body. That's actually where you feel the movements first. It's just like if you're sliding on ice. Your first sensation is you feel the traction lose and your back is going before you may even feel it in the steering wheel. But the issue in iRacing is there is no such thing. There is no movement, at least in the simulator I use. So all the sensation is through the steering wheel. Hard to know where that limit is. Very hard to know where that limit is. So for me, I have struggled, you know, frankly, to get past that and figure it out. But it's extremely important right now. You know, I actually just got the release from IndyCar just a couple minutes ago about, you know, the media value of last weekend's race. And I think if I pull it back up, you know, again, it was worth, as a series for everybody, it was like $13+ million, you know, in media value for one race. I mean, that's a crazy thing to think about, that, you know, this is a video game. You have 13.1 million in advertising value. So, you know, it's a crazy thing to think that a video game could be worth that. But we are seeing it at this time.
Thank you.
So, Graham, I'm curious, you know, Randy and I we are huge IndyCar fans. In fact, my son and my husband are on this call because that's how we spend every Memorial Days at the 500.
Yeah.
And we struggle with why people don't appreciate the sport maybe as much as they should. And I know with the split, you know, that happened, you know, several years ago, that there were challenges. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you think needs to be done for maybe the media and the public to be more aware of the appeal of IndyCar?
You know, it's interesting. I actually feel like right now may be a good opportunity to put IndyCar back in the limelight. I feel this iRacing thing has helped, but I also think IndyCar racing could be, I don't like this, to be clear, but IndyCar racing could be one of the first forms to actually go back to sports and back to action without fans. Now, I say that with the sentiment that, for me, fans are what our sport thrives on. Fans are what it's all about. Having said that, because we are a sport that is so sponsor money driven, a lot of sponsors just want the TV time right now. A lot of sponsors realize the people in this country just want to see something. They want to watch a live sport. Probably a lot like each and every one of you guys, I've watched every Buckeye football rerun I can think of. I've watched every Blue Jackets, you know, rerun I can possibly think of over the last handful of years. And at some point, you just want something, you know, to dive into. So I think it's a good opportunity. IndyCar racing could be that thing. Why are people? Why do I think it's not as popular as it could be? Number one is the power of storytelling. NASCAR really overtook IndyCar racing. And I'm not going to say that everything that they did was fabricated, because it's not. But they were the kings of, you know, the number 3 comes back to racing, right? Which was Dale Earnhardt's number. Austin Dillon brings the number 3 back, which is the same team Dale Earnhardt drove for. Richard Childress is Austin Dillon's grandfather. And what happens at the Daytona 500 that year? The number 3 is on pole for its first race back. Danica Patrick goes to NASCAR. What happens the first year? Danica Patrick, in her very first ever NASCAR race, she's on pole at the Daytona 500. If you guys don't think that's a little bit strange, then you're fooling yourself. But what are they good at? They are great storytellers, and they have captured the attention of millions of people. And IndyCar racing never had that in the fabric of it. It didn't have the dramatic, the sensationalism that maybe other sports did. At the same time, NASCAR compounded that in a great way with sponsor dollars. So when I was 10 years ago, a guy named Carl Edwards drove for Subway. Well, every Subway commercial you saw had Carl Edwards. Every Mountain Dew commercial you saw had Dale Earnhardt Jr. And so what does that begin to do is pound home these names in people's heads across America. And it built the reputation, it built the sport up a lot. There's no secret that IndyCar racing went through a down period where sponsorship was tough to come by. And if you got the sponsorship, the sponsors weren't about to go spend double that amount of money to put commercials during the Super Bowl or whatever it may be. But that's eventually how you need to build the brands. When you look at IndyCar racing and you go to Mid-Ohio, over a weekend, there's 100,000+ people every single time. You go to the Indy 500. I mean, obviously you guys know this if you've been, but the Indy 500 is still the world's largest single-day sporting event with 350,000 people year in and year out. So there still are events, and the sport itself is still alive and well, better now than it was before. But we have to figure out a way to capture the minds of people again. And I think a lot of that does come down to the storytelling and just purely being front and center at all times.
I think a lot of people don't understand quite what it means to be an athlete as a race car driver. And could you walk us through a little bit about, I've heard people say, well, they just sit in a car. And my husband makes this joke that when we go to the 500, we drive 3 hours to get there, watch you drive for 3 hours, and then drive 3 hours home. But there's a lot of difference in what you drive and the way I drive. So can you walk us through kind of what your training regimen is and how physically taxing it is?
Well, I think it's pretty – so here would be a great example. In 2006, maybe 2007, Justin Wilson, who unfortunately we lost in an accident a few years back. But Justin Wilson, they did basically a study kind of – they weighed him before the race, and they weighed him in Mexico City after the race. Obviously a pretty warm race in Mexico City. And he lost 11 pounds in one race.
Wow.
Now, clearly, that's water weight, but we are drinking water. We utilize a Camelback backpack bladder, basically, that we put in the side of the car, and a tube runs up, into our helmet that we can drink through. But that just shows you the physical strength that it takes. Because, the cars are hot. It's hot inside. There's no driver aid, so the steering weight is very heavy. There are no aids with the pedals. So when you hit a brake pedal in a street car, it's soft and, it's easy to generate a lot of force. Well, in an Indy car, it's not. It's like pushing on concrete. And so when you do this for a long period of time, I mean, it wears you down. It wears you down physically. It wears you down mentally. Often Mid-Ohio, actually, right near home is in July or August. It's a 90-degree day. It's humid, as we all know it can be at that time of year, and it's brutal. So, to me, those races really, they beat you up. It's that simple. So what do I do for training? I mean, I run a lot. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3", around 200 pounds. And, let's be honest, like my teammate's 5'3" and 130. And in our world, weight is king and size is king. So being small, it's a sport where being a jockey would be a great thing. I always joke with everybody that in racing life, I'd like to be short, but in real life, I'd like to be tall. So I'll take the tall, and, when this is all over, I'll be happy about it. But it is a harder challenge than for me to try to stay light and to try to stay thin. So, on average, I'll probably, every time, I go for a run or get on the treadmill, I try to run for at least an hour, 7 to 10 miles at a time, and then combine that with some sort of lifting. For me, lifting is typically going to be a lighter weight, longer duration. If I were trying to be a football player, obviously that wouldn't be what I'm going for. But in racing, it's all about endurance. So a couple hours nonstop. We might do some races like Mid-Ohio where you might not get a yellow flag, where you get no time to breathe. No caution period. For those who aren't familiar with the yellows, it's a point where we all get behind a pace car. They clean up an accident, whatever it was, or debris, and then but it gives you 4 or 5 laps at a 60-mile-an-hour pace where you can just kind of catch your breath and take a drink and whatever. If you don't get one of those and you're going for 2 hours straight without a break, you need that stamina in a big way. So that's kind of what I focus on, frankly, is just trying to build up that endurance as best we can.
Randy, you had a question?
Graham, certainly this is a difficult year, a difficult season. They've now added a third race to Indy late in the year.
Yeah.
How do you think this season eventually plays out?
Well, I think we could be doing this a while. I have a feeling this could last, until the end of October, at least. Not the coronavirus stuff. I'm talking about the season could last a lot, maybe a couple months longer than it was supposed to. It also looks like the summer months for us are going to be hell. Once we start, it appears that we will not stop for a long period of time. This season, when we first saw the schedule, it was looking nice because it appeared like we were going to have most of July off because NBC, which is where we're shown, NBC and NBC Sports, covered the Olympics. So if you're covering the Olympics, then they're gone for that month, and they can't air anything but the Olympics for that month. Now that's not the case. Obviously, the Olympics are delayed. And so what does that do? They've now filled those gaps. The Indy 500 is not long after that. So we will actually go Mid-Ohio is the race leading into the Indy 500 this year, which is pretty crazy for us to think about. But we will race in Mid-Ohio on Sunday. And on Tuesday, we'll be on track at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. For myself, for our teams, for everybody, there's no break there. Those are two very different types of racing, and you have to go back to back. It looks, obviously they've added a third race at Indianapolis. They've added several races where doubleheader weekends. So you have a full race on Saturday, full race on Sunday. We were just talking about how physically demanding it is. That's going to be a bruiser for us. And then it looks like they're still going to finish the season off maybe in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is where we're supposed to start in March. But that could be the end of October now. So, we have to do what we have to do. I won't lie to you guys. I am the biggest diehard Buckeye football fan, and I was planning on doing something else on those weekends, racing. But obviously my priorities are going to change here as we go forward. And, the biggest thing is we just have to get through this. Because again, if we don't, then somehow our sponsors are going to want money back. They're going to want credits towards the future. They're going to want something. And that, for a business like we're in, that's detrimental to us. I mean, it could put us out of business because, whatever we get in sponsorship every year is spent. It's spent on people, personnel. It's spent on racing. It's spent on travel. It's spent on development and all these things that we do. Well, if they want a credit, where are you going to come up with that? I mean, all of our employees are still full-time. They're full salary, full healthcare. We haven't laid anybody off. Everybody's continued on. So that money is still being spent towards something. And so we need to get all those races in and try to fulfill it, as best as we can this year.
Okay, well, Graham likes the double headers. Witnessed Detroit for many a year. He was the youngest IndyCar winner ever with his win at St. Pete. What, 18, Graham?
Yeah, long time ago. Yeah, the double headers are pretty brutal. I won't lie to you. I think, well, the double header that I won both of was in Detroit, which was a lot of fun. Trust me, I took a lot of, you guys all get this, but I took a lot of pride in a Buckeye winning up in that state, and I made sure to let them know about that too. But it was that was a fun one for me. But that's also probably the most physical and the most bruising one. So that race has actually been canceled for this year. That will not happen. Unfortunately, Michigan has been hit pretty hard, as everybody's seen with this COVID-19 stuff. So that was supposed to kick off our season on this new schedule at the end of May. And as of a couple days ago, they canceled that. So we're not going to be doing that. But they filled in Iowa will be a doubleheader. They filled in Laguna Seca, which is out in Carmel, Monterey area of California. Beautiful, beautiful area of the world. That'll be a doubleheader. Trying to think of where else. Somewhere else is a doubleheader. So they filled in races with all these doubleheaders. It's going to be pretty busy for us, as we go through this thing.
Colin, you had a question, Colin Binger?
Yeah. So with the more back-to-back race weekends and double headers, and with the added, I know there were some concerns about ventilation with the aero screen. Do you have any personal concerns or things you've heard from other drivers, physical health, anything like that?
I don't. As far as getting back to it, you mean like with fears of COVID or anything, or just purely the physicality of the aero screen?
Yeah, just the physicality. I mean, you mentioned, losing weight, and, if there's less ventilation, that's gonna.
It's hot. So we did test 2 days this year. One of the days was in Austin, Texas, and it was cold. It was 50 degrees, and yet it was still extremely hot. The second day was in Sebring, Florida, so it was an 80-plus degree day, muggy, disgusting. And that wasn't it wasn't as bad as I mean, it's hot. It's going to be physically much more – there's just no airflow. You get no airflow. So it's kind of stagnant air all the time, and you just get really, really sweaty. I mean, a hot race like Mid-Ohio, something that time of year is going to be brutal. But the way that I look at this is it's just, number one, the same for everybody. And number two, I had already mentioned, that I individually am a lot bigger than most of these guys. And so typically, actually, hot races and tough physical days benefit me and my size and strength. So for me, I almost look at it like it could play out to be a little bit of an advantage, particularly when we look at, when we're racing there in the summer months, we're racing every single weekend. Guys are going to get tired. People are going to get sore after a while. That's natural. And so, I think in cases like that, it might work out a little bit better, for me. But there's no doubt it's going to change the game a little bit for all of us. But, again, it's the same for everybody. It's just, like playing any sport. If it's a nice, rainy day outside, it's the same for both sides of the field, both teams. And so to me, in this scenario, it's the same for every single driver, and you have to go out and try to make the most out of it.
Josh, you had a question?
Yeah. How open has IndyCar been with you guys about what their plan is going forward? Like, do you guys find out what their plan is, like when everyone else finds out through like social media and that people might have notifications on for, or do they give you guys priority when it comes to that kind of stuff?
Well, you would think that they'd give us priority. I think that like everybody, they're drinking through a fire hose. I think every day is a different day. They've tried their best to adjust to all of this on the fly. But obviously in a lot of the races that we do, we're not talking about just showing up and putting on a race. We're talking about, when we talk about a street course, it takes a month to build the racetrack in these cities. So, how do you plan that? That's why Detroit had to be canceled in May. I mean, I don't know. Detroit could be okay by the end of May. But to build the track means it's got to start in April, and it certainly isn't going to be ready to be built right now. So I think they're adjusting on the fly. As of the other day, they did give us a pretty good heads up before they released the updated schedule. What was it? 3 weeks ago, they released their first version of the updated schedule, and we got it at the same time it was released on social media. That wasn't a great deal, right? Because, again, I brought up the sponsorship side of our sport and our industry already, plenty. But we need to give our sponsors a heads up, too. I mean, they need to know, hey, this is going to affect your race. The race that you were sponsoring, we're not doing now, or whatever it may be. And when we didn't have that heads up, it put us in a bind. But I think now, going forward, I think that they understand that. And hopefully we don't see many more changes. But obviously this whole world, sports world in particular right now, it's all over the board. So it's hard for anybody to know what to expect.
So, one of the things that we've all been able to count on when things were not so great with sports. I mean, the great example is 9/11 and baseball got back, even things like the bombing at Boston Marathon, when the Red Sox came back, it was huge. And you mentioned Buckeye football and Buckeye athletics in general. We're all missing all of that. What would you say to people who are like looking for some aspect of normalcy and the place where sports kind of fits in that? What kind of words of wisdom do you have for them?
Well, certainly watching Tiger King isn't going to bring back any normalcy. So if you haven't watched it, don't look at that to make you feel good about life. But I think we're going to be back soon enough. It is, like I said, I suffer from the same thing. I talked earlier about how much I work out. A lot of that I do at home. But I do that watching sports. I mean, that's what gets me through an hour run. I mean, I'm not going to sit and just listen to music for an hour on a treadmill. That is no fun at all. So I think we're all going through the same. You're right. You look at 9/11, you look at how iconic that video, doesn't matter, politically what side, you sit on. The video of President Bush throwing out that first pitch was iconic. You look at what Las Vegas hockey team did following the Vegas shootings. The New Orleans, right, went to the Super Bowl after the big hurricane. So, we look to sports often to get us through these scenarios. Unfortunately, right now we're in a tough period of time that there's nothing. However, I think that there's a major emphasis to get sports back sooner than we think, whether that be hockey, whether that be football, basketball. I get the sense that they can monitor who's been in and out of those arenas, as well as the player teams themselves enough to where I feel like we might see something back here, relatively soon. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of that's the gut that I've gotten from a call that President Trump had the other day with a lot of the sports team owners, and happened to be one of our IndyCar owners was on that call, and that was the message that was heard. So, for me, what do I try to do? I also try to look at this period of time to obviously clearly connect. I mean, Zoom, what we're on right now, has become a great way to connect with people all over the world. FaceTime, I try to, develop and build the relationships that I have, connect with friends that I haven't talked to in a while, spend some time doing all of that. My stepdad lives in England, so it's been a good opportunity to connect with him and see how things are over there, what life's like over there right now. And the last thing is really just to get a lot of stuff done, focus on my health, but get a lot of stuff done around the house that I seriously would not ordinarily have the time to do. I mean, I was talking to my dad this morning, and he's been in one place for 30 days now. In my entire life, my dad has not been in one place for 30 days, ever. That's the truth. He has never done that. And so what does that kind of give him the opportunity to do is dot all the I's, cross all the T's of things that in ordinary life you're not going to have time, to be able to set your mind to be getting those things done. So that's what I've tried to focus on. It's not exciting. We need sports. Like I said, I watch all the reruns. I've gone through all of that stuff, and I pretty much I mean, I've literally resorted to watching like the most boring Ohio State blowout wins because I have nothing else to do. So I'm not a good one to talk about missing sports, that's for sure.
Well, Graham Rahal, we are thrilled that you joined us. Thank you so much. And before everybody goes, I want to mention every Thursday, the Sports and Society Initiative is going to be bringing in prominent sports personalities so we can talk about kind of where we are. Next week, we have Kirk Herbstreit joining us at 4 o'clock. So I hope you guys will be here for that. You're welcome to join us, Graham, if you have some free time. But we are so grateful that you joined us. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see you. And I hope to see you racing very soon.
Yeah, same here. Thank you, guys. Everybody be well, and hopefully be able to come and see some of you in person in the fall or something. So, but you guys all take care of yourselves and see you soon.